Hello, I'm Alex Harris. I produce and edit Business is Fucking Hard. Our wonderful host, Trevor Koot, also happens to be my uncle, and today's guest is his sister, my aunt, Laura Koot. We thought, why not make this episode a full family endeavor? So I'm doing the opening. Laura is the managing editor of The National, the only English newspaper in the United Arab Emirates, which she helped launch in 2007. She started at a school paper in university and worked her way up the industry quickly. Laura doesn't see herself in the guest list of this show because she doesn't own the business, but her entrepreneurialism fits well in a community of business owners and founders. And besides, as Trevor says, it's his podcast and he'll have whoever he wants as a guest. Laura was part of the inspiration for me to explore a career in journalism and media, so I really enjoyed editing this episode. This conversation is deep, interesting, and funny. So let's get into it.
Hi there, I'm Trevor Koot, and this is Business is Fucking Hard, the podcast where business owners pull back the curtain and talk about the realities of owning a business. We'll hear their stories, learn some lessons, and have some fun along the way. Thanks for joining us. Laura Koot, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here.
I'm
not sure why I'm here, but I'm here because Trevor told me to be.
Exactly. Yeah. So, for anybody that's listening, there's an obvious correlation here. The last name. It's such a pleasure to have my big sister on the podcast. I finally convinced you to be on the podcast. It took a little bit of convincing.
Well, I'm here with serious imposter syndrome because I don't fit the mold of your guests.
Yes.
I'm not an entrepreneur, so I'm here and I will do my part, but with the caveat that
yes,
I have not staked my entire livelihood on my profession.
Yes. Yeah. And I want to give some context to that because that was your hesitation, was this idea that you're not fitting this mold of business owner by the definition of previous guests. But I also emphasize to you that it's my podcast and I'll do what I want. So I think in this, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because you and I have, there's been different kinds of risk that we've each put ourselves, managed, mitigated, accepted based on the decisions that we've made in our career paths. Mine was more business ownership oriented, but yours was definitely, by any definition, entrepreneurial, and there was an element of risk associated with it. And I think, as my opening question for every guest to this point, we're coming on 40 or 50 episodes, has always been, what was your introduction to business? But I think in this case, what I want to do is just talk about the first elements of you kind of stepping out on a ledge. And I let the guest story kind of tell what the path was, where they're at today. But I think for this context, I'm going to say you work in journalism. You've worked in journalism most of your career, post secondary school, and you've had the privilege, the opportunity, the pleasure of launching a couple of media outlets, media products. And the first of which that I want to talk about, where you were actually part of the evolution, the introduction, was the National Post in Canada. So maybe we'll start there and then move into kind of more of that stepping out on even a bigger ledge after this part of the story. So what did that first conversation look like? Where were you at the time, and how did that evolve, that you got involved in kind of the introduction of the National Post to Canada?
Yeah, so I would say I want to go backwards a little bit to answer your first question about where I stepped out on the ledge. And I would say that was when I decided that university and Laura did not.
Right.
And I think, I went to the University of Western for a couple of years. I tried English, I tried poli-sci, things that naturally I was drawn to. And I did not find them stimulating. What I did find stimulating was the student newspaper. And there we had, lots of arguments and intellectual conversation and the opportunity to meet and interview very interesting people from government to healthcare to community leaders to everybody. And that was, for me, like the most impactful education that I could have asked for, because there were a lot of sort of weirdos and outcasts just like me. And we all, put together this daily student newspaper to people who still read newspapers at that time, because this is a few years ago. After that, I went to Brunswick and got an internship at the provincial newspaper there, the Telegraph Journal. And I did my 3-month internship and I got hired on. And I had a couple of jobs there over the course of almost 2 years. And that's where I was when I got a call about this new national newspaper that was going to start. And we were in New Brunswick. I think probably in more central places in the country, Ontario, probably Vancouver, there had been more chatter about this project, but we were kind of
Right.
oblivious to it. So when somebody called me and tried to explain what it was, I was like, that seems crazy, but it could be good. But do I really want to give up? Like, I had had sort of this very brief meteoric rise at this provincial paper where I was. I'd gone from intern to a Canada and World editor to the front page editor, which was a very prestigious job because you basically ran the night desk. And I was this kid, in my 20s, running a desk of older gentlemen in their 50s and 60s. And
Right.
we were like the oddest group ever. And so I had this offer. They told me if I would take a job on the business desk at the National Post, which is what it came to be, then they would hire me on the spot. And I was like, if there's one thing I knew, I did not want to work in business. It was my least favorite passion. I was not going to spend the rest of my life editing business. Like, no, thank you. So they were like, well,
Awesome.
if you don't want to edit business, then you're going to have to come to Toronto for an interview to be on the news desk. And I was like, yes, I will do that. So I went there, and it was like this weird building in Don Mills where our office was for many years. And I met Marvin Zivitz, who was the hiring editor, and Martin Newland, who was the deputy editor there. And I did my interview, and I guess they liked me because they hired me. And I was very young at the time. I
Wait,
was,
what year would it have been, Laura? Because
what year?
yeah,
It would have been 97 or
yeah,
98.
yeah. So just like, obviously you weren't looking at this, like the risk for you was personal, move
Yeah,
across
I
to,
didn't have any responsibilities. I mean, I
right.
saved a little bit of money. I had a very small cushion at the time,
Yeah.
but I figured
But the
like,
risk, sorry, the risk wouldn't have been like that, launching a national paper, that the newspaper industry was under pressure, or that like the
at that
internet hadn't gotten to the
time,
point.
at that time, there was still, newspaper wars.
Yeah,
People still read
exactly.
physical
Yeah,
newspapers. And
right.
I was very keen on this opportunity, um, as much out of spite as anything else, because I really liked my job. But I didn't want to say no to an opportunity out of fear. I wanted to check it out and make sure. But also, it was out of spite because when I was at the Gazette, the student newspaper at Western, all of the journalists applied for all of the internships at the big newspapers. Everybody wanted to work at the Globe and Mail or the Toronto
Yep.
Star.
Right.
And I interviewed at both of them. And I think somewhere in my files, I still have my, you know, go away letters from
Your
them.
rejection letter.
Yeah, my super rejection letters. And I wanted to be able to show them that I was of a caliber to work at a national newspaper. And when I went there, it was just like the people there were so excited and the kinds of stories they wanted to tell. And I saw, some hints of what it might look like. And it was just that there was such a buzz around it that I couldn't imagine not going there. So I would have been devastated if I didn't get the job, but I did. And so I went there and I was working on the National Post before there was a National Post, because when you
Right.
launch a newspaper, there's a lot of prep work that needs to be done. You have to get really comfortable in the job, and everybody does, and the whole rhythm. And you go through a period in the lead up to the launch called dry runs, where you literally put out the entire newspaper every day. So the reporters report, the editors edit, designers design, and at the end of the day, there's a real paper ready to go to press. And
Nobody reads.
Nobody ever sees it. It's a lot of work, but we had to get it down, because as we were going through that process, there would be holes on the pages because we'd have to hit the deadline. And when the deadline hit, we'd see, oh, there's a hole
Somebody
there,
missed.
there's a hole there. So we had to get to the point where we were a well-oiled machine and we were able to actually send this paper out, which we did, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so I think the difference, we're going to hear the continuation of your story, but in this case, you were, your role was really on that editing piece. Your contribution was to get that final product out on those dry runs. Less about kind of the overall structure, hiring people, making sure that the paper
Completely.
had what
I was
needed.
I was a child.
Yeah.
It was like my third paid journalism job, aside from a few freelance gigs. I was the youngest person on that staff for probably 4 or 5 years. I was by far the youngest. And my job was on production. So I was a copy editor. I would copy edit the stories. I would build the pages. At that time, it was using Quark Express. And I would write the headlines and put the pictures on and make sure everything was on the page and reading perfectly. And that was my first job at the National Post. Over time, I moved on to do different things.
Yeah, and I want to get into that. I want to give, like, just doing the math myself. Like I know, like, obviously, and it would be the same with you if I was telling you my story. Like, we know kind of the general arc, but it's fun to hear some of these specifics. I didn't know that you went to the Telegraph Journal on an internship, for example. So that was a nugget that I got out of this.
Totally.
But just to give some context, you were, like, when you say in your 20s, we're not talking 29 going on 30. You were 22 in 1998, like, or turned 22 at the end of 1998. So like we're talking early 20s. Like, you were,
yeah, I would
relative to everybody else.
Yeah, I was about 21 when I was at the National Post. Because when I came to Abu Dhabi, I just was turning 30. So, and I was at the National Post for 9 years. So about 21. You're right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that journey, because like, some of the piece that I want to make sure we weave into the conversation is the changes that you saw in kind of the technology and the disruption that happened. Like, you mentioned, I don't know what softwares or platforms you were using. You mentioned one already, but kind of in that first 9 years, before we talk about the next iteration of your entrepreneurial journey into launching another newspaper, and truly being part of the launch of that newspaper in the United Arab Emirates, as you just teased out with the comment about Abu Dhabi, what was that 9 year process looking like for you, like to be able to get to the point where you could launch a newspaper on a global level?
Yeah, so I mean, I started in production, and during my time there, I learned a lot about design. And I became very involved with the design of the paper. And I had a mentor. Her name was Gail Grin, and she taught me everything that I know now about design. She was like my personal master class. So I worked a lot with the design team. And by the time I left the National Post, I had a position called news presentation editor. And I don't think that this position exists at any other newspaper. It was one of these jobs that was just, they gave me the job and the title to match the secret sauce that I brought to the equation.
Right.
And so what
Love
my
that.
job was basically, it was like being a producer of the newspaper. So I would, look at where everything was sitting and make sure everything was packaged nicely and the rhythm was right and the mix was good. And then we would have different editions of the paper. So we might have a West Coast edition and a Toronto edition, and we would have to move the content around for each edition to kind of prioritize what those audiences would prefer. And so I was much younger, and I could fit a lot more in my brain in a short period of time in those days. So I knew exactly where everything was going, and it would just be like I was conducting the newspaper. It would be like, okay, this is going here, this is going here. We need to redo this page. We need to do that. And I would.
Can we pause for a second?
Yeah.
Because I need to make this correlation that you were like the algorithm behind some of these other the social media platforms that are feeding content. You were the algorithm to feed the content in the right order. Yeah, you were Facebook before, or TikTok before there was TikTok, feeding the right content at the right time to the right audience. I love it.
Yeah, and this is literally decades before recommendation engines.
Yeah.
I went through a recommendation engine.
Yeah, exactly. I love it.
It wasn't me alone, obviously. It was all of the editors that were working on the night, and everybody would fight to get their stories in the right places. And then I would just make sure that they were all, shining, basically. My job was to bring the sparkle. Like, should we get a map with that? Should we, redo this page so that this is more prominent or whatever? Right. These kinds of things. So I was kind of like this hybrid of sub-editor, designer, signing editor. I kind of bridged all of these things. And for me, the reason that this job was so special to me is because it really allowed me to understand everything that goes on in a newsroom. Because of what I've already done at this point of my career, where I had written, I had edited, I had designed, I had, done photo, I had, worked helping out the sports department. I basically dabbled in all the parts of the paper. And I did that without having a team. I was kind of like a lone warrior in the newsroom that had to get everybody to work together. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed kind of bridging all of these kind of departments and finding solutions and finding a rhythm for how we were going to do everything every day. And so, yeah, that was sort of like the springboard for what came next.
Was that your second?
That's your cue.
that was well done.
Yeah.
For being so nervous about doing a podcast, you did that so
Not
well.
Nervous about the podcast, nervous about I don't fit here.
Yeah. No, you absolutely do, and people are already hearing that. The tens of people that listen to this are already getting that. So that's the springboard. You've I don't know if you've articulated, I'm going to speculate, you kind of figured out where your niche was, what your contribution, what you could offer to kind of maybe not even just that ecosystem. It wouldn't kind of matter where you were. You were figuring out your strengths were all the things you talked about, bringing people together, finding those bridges, making things shine, all of that context. So, so I won't
Oh, I
segue. Oh,
must say at
yeah,
this
please.
point, because, I took the job to spite the Globe and Mail and the Toronto
Yeah.
Star.
Did it
But
work?
no, what was even juicier and tastier in this whole, like, I hate the word journey, but I just used it, was, it was a newspaper war in Toronto during this time, and everybody was trying to get the best people, and the National Post coming on the scene with all of their great storytelling and sort of their really outrageous way of doing things. It really was disruptive on the newspaper scene. And the Star and the Globe, they wanted a piece of the action. They wanted whatever this fairy dust that was sprinkled over this newsroom. They wanted a piece of it. So they started poaching,
Yeah.
staff from the National. And I'm happy to say that I had multiple offers from the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail over these 9 years, which some of them were really beautiful offers. And I have many friends who work at both of these papers, and I would have been delighted to work with them. But I am a serial monogamist, and the National Post was really like, it was in my DNA by that point. So
Yeah.
I stayed there. But you're right. Like a lot of the skills that I got were very transferable. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and I think arguably, like I think about all the things that I've seen happen in kind of the business world and that kind of stuff. Like you always need that linchpin, right? Bigger organizations need that person or people or department, whatever it is, to kind of be able to frame everything, bring it together, and provide a product. And certainly, I mean, technology companies are famous for that. So, it's interesting that you were able to frame your opportunity to say no to the Globe and the Star not as continuing that spite, but more as that loyalty to the National Post and the
it wasn't really
yeah,
about, that's just me being
yeah,
silly. But
yeah,
no, I was extremely loyal to the National
yeah.
Post.
So then the springboard that you offered me earlier, with considering that loyalty, and now that you've added that context, what did that next opportunity look like, and why was it attractive under the circumstances of all of the serial monogamy, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I think it boiled down to just um, the monotony of life.
Yeah.
The offer came
Timing.
at exactly the right time,
Yeah.
where I just felt like, okay, I've been doing this job for a long time. Um, my husband Craig and I, we were really noticing that our weeks were kind of becoming repetitive. We do the same things, and there wasn't anything really stimulating happening. It was like we were too comfortable. And it was at that moment that Martin Newland, who was the deputy editor when we launched the National Post, he had gone on to be the editor in chief of the Telegraph in London. And he called me. I hadn't spoken to him in probably 5 or 6 years. And he always called me Coodle. Coodle. He called me Coodle because at the National Post, we would have the list of pages that everybody was working on. It would be last name, first initial.
Oh, yeah. Coot L. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like, he told me that he was in Abu Dhabi. And I was like, what's an Abu Dhabi? I don't know what an Abu Dhabi is. And he's like, I'm starting a newspaper here, and I need you to come and work with me. And I was like, why would I do that? That's just bonkers. And he's like, there's no snow and no taxes. And I was like, oh, that's pretty compelling. Okay, when do you need me to start? And I would say not a lot more went into that decision making.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was just, okay, starting another newspaper. That sounds amazing. So he hired me actually to be the art director. So I didn't come out here in my current role, although I did get my current role after a couple months because there was a need for that role to be filled. And at that point, I had proven myself. So I became the managing editor and the art director. And I have been here as the managing editor now. It'll be 18 years on October 1st. So I have seen a lot in 18 years as the Middle East has changed and the newspaper business has changed. And yeah, but now you want to talk about the startup.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where, I mean, I often, when business owners talk about that transition of, and so many do, where they didn't, just start as a business owner. They had a career, they were an executive, they were in a staff position, an employee position somewhere, and then they took that, and I've used this wording twice now, the stepping out onto the ledge, right? The taking the risk of okay, I'm moving away from the security of this job and stepping into something, the unknown, really. And I think there's, just hearing your story, you've had an experience around launching a paper. So that's not the unknown anymore. You've watched that happen. You've been a part of it. But there's a lot more unknown going into moving to a different part of the world. When knowing some of this part of the story, there wasn't any of the infrastructure that would have existed at the National Post when you went there in Toronto. There was zero infrastructure, and so you're stepping out into the desert, literally, and at basically an infancy of this country. It's still growing and still developing and still trying to find itself in the world. So yes, springboard, ledge, whatever you want to call it. Tell us about that startup.
Yeah, well, I had no idea what I was getting into.
Yeah.
I knew I had met one person who had been to Abu Dhabi before and he just loved it. I Googled it and very little came up, which is hilarious today because now if you Google it, you can
Of
see
course.
years of the National and way more. It's just like it's
And
everybody.
just for context, we've given it little hints, but this is about 2006, 2007, right?
This was
2006, you would have got the offer.
2007 when I moved.
Seven,
Yes.
when you
Yeah.
moved. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, I mean, if somebody who was here in 2007 and then they came again now, the
Yeah.
place is unrecognizable. Like
Yeah.
it's totally different. At that time, there was just not enough of anything. There was not enough apartments. There were not enough hotels. There was everything was done manually. If you wanted anything, we walked around carrying passport photos because everywhere you went, you needed to provide passport photos. I have no idea what people were doing with all these passport photos, but it was like the way that you identified yourself. I just had like this image that there was a warehouse somewhere full of like all the passport
Tiny
photos for
photos.
everybody in Abu Dhabi. Um, so yeah, when I arrived, I was literally like the first person to come from away. There were like a couple people here. Well, Martin was here. Another person who I had previously worked with at the National Post had been already in the UAE for a number of years. So he was here. And the deputy editor at the time was here as well. So I was the first person to come and work on this project that was hired from away. And it was wacky. Like, I never know where to begin when I'm telling this story because like, okay, first of all, if you're going to move to a place, you need a place to live, right? There were no places to live. There were no
Yeah.
apartments available. And the apartments that were available were so extremely expensive. It was like completely outside the range of what we were getting paid. These would have all been good questions to ask before moving.
Saying yes.
But this is what we encountered. So we were basically all we were living in hotels or hotel apartments and working around the clock. Like we just worked all the time because we had to hire all the other people that were going to work with us. So we just were like all day going through CVs and making plans and figuring stuff out. And then all night we would be interviewing because of the time difference. So we would have dinner, and then we'd go back to our rooms and interview people all night and then start again the next day. And it became clear very quickly. When we launched, we were a government newspaper. So we were inside a building that was part of Abu Dhabi Media. And well, at the time it was Emirates Media. It became Abu Dhabi Media. And there was an Arabic newspaper. So we were kind of put in a little office at the back of the Arabic newspaper. But this Arabic newspaper, Al Ittihad, which is just a total institution in Abu Dhabi, like it is revered as a media entity. It's it's the grandfather of journalism in Abu Dhabi. But the way that they were doing things was so outdated from the way I knew how things were being done. So things that in my experience had been automated and managed by two people, they had like a whole room with 20 guys working on. And it was just like, oh, we are coming from very different places here. How are we going to use, we need to do a modern version of what they're doing without kind of upsetting the apple cart, because we're going to show that some of these things that they're doing can be done with fewer people, and you don't want to, upset anybody. And also they just didn't believe us. Like, why would you believe that something that it takes 20 men to do it? And it's like, well, there's also a software that you can run, and it's quite simple. So,
but you were running independent of them. There wasn't an expectation that you.
No, we were sharing a physical space, but there had been an assumption, I think, when whoever decided to started the project, thinking that there would be a lot of
economies of scale, efficiencies, all that kind of stuff.
100%.
And just for additional context, you're there to launch the national English newspaper for the United Arab Emirates. So you're in Abu Dhabi. It's an Abu Dhabi focused media and business government agency, but you are providing a newspaper for the entirety of the United Arab Emirates.
Eventually, it would get a name, and the name of this news, we would now call a news organization, is the National. But yes. It was the concept was that it would be a broadsheet newspaper, meant to be really quality journalism, very credible, like a broadsheet that you would find in the UK or the US or Canada. And it would give some gravitas to the ambitions that the government had. So when, for example, business leaders or decision makers came to Abu Dhabi, they would see this newspaper and understand that this was a serious place to come and do business.
Gotcha.
So that
Makes
was
sense.
that was the dream. And also, at that time, that this is when people in the West would have started to hear about Abu Dhabi, because at the same time that we were, launching, there were other big things, like Etihad Airways had just launched a couple of years before. The Yas track was being built to host the F1. There was the yacht races. There was huge concerts happening here. Big sporting events being hosted, the tennis, the golf. So all of these things, this is when they were all sort of being adopted here as regular events that you would see on TV if you're flipping through the Gulf. Then you see,
Right.
oh, these golfers are in Abu Dhabi. So
And
this,
of course, Dubai being an hour and a half away, Dubai has always been kind of a little bit more of a central, a globally known a place, a city
yeah,
within the United Arab Emirates.
for sure. It was always a lot shinier and more of a known destination than Abu
Yeah,
Dhabi. Probably it
yeah,
still is, but I think Abu Dhabi holds its own now more than it did
yeah,
years ago.
sure.
So, yeah, one of the things that we realized pretty quickly is they just assumed that they could print our newspaper on the same printing press that the Arabic newspaper was on. But I guess
Ah,
nobody really kind of clued into the fact that we would both finish our newspaper at the same time, and you can only print
great.
one newspaper at a time.
Right. Amazing.
So when we showed them the math on this, it was like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, okay.
This is
Because
one of
we
my
can't
favorite
finish at
stories.
like 6 o'clock and have a newspaper. It's just not really how it works. So there was a guy called Ali Al Nuaimi. He's an Emirati guy. He ran United Printing and Publishing, which was at that time a sort of a subsidiary of Abu Dhabi Media. And he was kind of tasked with solving this problem. Like, we need a press. But you don't just go to the hardware store and buy a printing press. Like, it's kind of a huge operation. So once you determine which press you want, you order it. They manufacture the press.
Right. Of
And
course.
then they deliver it in a million different pieces that have to all be put together. And so this whole process, like from the time somebody decides they want a printing press to the time that it's ready to operate, it's probably usually 2 or 3 years, like easily. We didn't have 2 or 3 years. I arrived in October 1st. I arrived at the end of September. My first day was October 1st, and we launched on April 17th.
Holy.
And so we needed a press quick, and we needed a place to put the press. So we found a place, and Ali, he was some kind of genius. I don't even know how he did it. I think he was well connected. He'd been in the business for a while. And he discovered that there was a printing press on a boat on its way to Germany to a publisher in Germany.
I love this
And
story.
he somehow got the news organization in Germany to agree. He paid them somehow to break
Right.
their contract for the press. And they turned the boat, and it came to deliver the press to us instead. So the press arrived, still in a million pieces. Um, the press is very heavy. So before the press arrived, we had to pour the concrete floor, and it had to set. So that was happening while we were waiting for the press to arrive. And when the press finally arrived, we had, I don't even know how many um, workers building this thing day and night around the clock. It would look like a stadium set up with lights, and they were just building and building and building and building, and it just went on forever. And luckily, it doesn't rain here, because at this time we just have the concrete slab and the press being built on top of the concrete slab, and there's no building.
No roof.
There's no walls or roof. It's just this press on this concrete slab. So at some point, as they're building the press, another bunch of guys come and start building walls and a roof. And it was by the skin of our teeth that that press was ready when we were ready to go live. So while that press is being built, there's all these people coming into Abu
Yeah,
Dhabi
exactly.
and zero apartments. There's no apartments. Like, I stayed in the hotel for 3 months. I put a deposit down on two different apartments. By the time I got back to my office, I got a call from the owner saying, "Come pick up your deposit. We decided to give it to somebody else." Like, it was crazy. And finally, through a friend of a friend, I found a place to live. Thank goodness. I'm sitting in that apartment right now, 18 years later, even though there's a million new apartments in the city. Um, but I got lucky. Some people were in those hotel apartments for months and months and months, but we couldn't let them just be in those apartments forever. They were very expensive and they were old, and nobody wanted to be living there. Everybody just wanted a place to live. This is when I became a landlord, because the solution in Abu Dhabi at the time, if you needed apartments, was to rent a building that had not yet
Yeah.
been built. So we rented, I think we had, by the end of it, 5 different buildings. Three of them were like apartment buildings, and a couple were like more villas that were broken down into 5 or 6 apartments. And basically, people didn't really have a choice. It was kind of like going back to university and living in a dorm, because depending on when you arrived, you were just paired with a roommate. Because if you wanted to get out of the hotel, you had to go into like a 2 bedroom, and you got who you got. Now, some people, they were already here and able to find somebody they actually wanted to live with. But um, as time went on, people would arrive and it'd be like, okay, this is the room that's open. You're with Georgia now. Like, that's what you get. And so, yeah, I was managing all these apartments and keys and who was in them and moving them
At
around.
the same time, like there's a press being built, a building being built.
Yeah.
You're still doing all the recruiting. Like, these people have to be
We're
vetted,
still
and you're
recruiting.
still doing all of the interviews, all of that kind of that component. But you're also starting to talk about designing a paper, buting a
No,
paper,
we're
what
like
this your
totally building it. So we're
yeah,
designing, we have design
distribution,
teams
what's it going to
doing
look
it.
like, how
At some point, somebody's like, "Oh, we're going to need computers." So, like, I was ordering computers for all the people coming in. We didn't have computers for everybody because it took a really long time to get things. And then I remember one day it was like, it was a great day because there was a shipment of computers coming. And I don't know what I imagined it would look like when the computers arrived, but it was not how it transpired. So it was like this, all of our computers were tossed in the back of a pickup truck that had like these grates on the back. It was like the same trucks they used to transport camels, but it was all of our computers were like just tossed in the back and then delivered. And I was just like, oh my gosh, we've waited all this time. And are these computers even going to work? I hope they
right?
work.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a newsroom either. This is another thing that was missing. Is I don't know if anybody thought, like, where are these people going to work? We need a space to work in. And at Abu Dhabi Media, there was this old abandoned theater, like with proper like theater seats and a stage and curtains. Like, it was wild, but nobody had been in this space for like years and years except cats. There were cats all over that theater.
But there are cats all over Abu Dhabi.
There are a lot of cats in Abu Dhabi, but a lot of them had taken up residence in this
Right.
theater.
Yeah.
So the
Unreal.
chairs got pulled out and tables got put in, and it was like a makeshift newsroom while people learned how to do journalism here. And at the beginning, people were sharing computers and using notebooks and doing whatever they could, and everything was prioritized. So the people who were like designing the paper had computers, but the reporters had to kind of take turns, and the we started banking stories. This is what we call like evergreen content, stories that can be written and held to be
Right.
published
For
later.
future. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to pause you. I have two questions.
Hit
Who
me.
chose the April timeline? Like was that, or was it just let's work as fast as we can and we'll get the first issue out whenever it's ready? Or
Yeah,
was
it
that
wasn't like, I
pre-established?
don't think there was like a reason for that date. I'm not, I honestly can't remember how we arrived at
Okay.
that date. I think it
Yeah.
was like,
It wasn't like you got there on October 1st and the first issue has to go out on April 17th or
no,
whatever you said.
it
Yeah.
was, I would assume that somebody upstairs said, let's launch on this date. And then we kind
Yeah.
of work backwards from that. It just
Right.
doesn't really stick in my
Yeah.
memory as
Yeah.
being a real
Then my other
issue.
question is, was money a concern? Like when you started looking at this theater, was it, okay, where's the money going to come from to remove the chairs and put in tables and make it our newsroom? Or was it
No.
just do what you needed to do, turn ships around with printing presses on them, whatever it
So it
takes?
was kind of an interesting dynamic because I mentioned in passing earlier that when I arrived, this entity was called Emirates Media, and
Yeah.
then it changed into Abu Dhabi Media. And this was part of a process that was going on where um, there were basically advisors from a company called Mubadala, which kind of at that time they were kind of responsible for modernizing and finding efficiency. They were like the government's consultants. That's how they were at that time. Now it's a different sort of thing. But at that time, they were brought in basically to look at Abu Dhabi media, what was missing. And I think that the National was sort of a product of that process. And sort of reimagining how sort of the C-suite of that whole company should, what it should look like, how it should operate. So there was a lot of transformation going on within Abu Dhabi Media at that time. But those sort of consultant type guys from Mubadala that were there to see this whole transition through were very hands-on with the National. So, for example, they didn't know that we needed an editorial system. So in
Right.
newsrooms, every newsroom has a content management system. It's the brain of your operation. That's where you write your stories into, you file your photos into, your news wires go into that. You publish from there, you edit in there. Nobody goes a day without touching that system. Like it is the guts of the operation. We needed one, and what the Arabic paper was using was not going to meet our requirements. So I, myself and the production editor, basically looked at what was out in the market, what would best meet our requirements. I mean, I wouldn't not say we did an RFP because what we did was a list of requirements in like a
Yeah.
day. And then a week later, we were
What
on
fits?
flights going to look at these systems in operation. Like everything was just super fast forward, you know? Um, but in order to, every time we needed to do something, and this is to answer your question about money, basically there was money to do things as long as it was for a reason. So every night at the same time that we were interviewing people and doing all of our work at home, I think I wrote a business case or three every single night to justify why we needed to do things.
Particular piece. Yeah.
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 So we need a CMS. Here are the ones we looked at. Here's why we arrived at the one. We need to go and look at it in person to finalize it. This is, when we need to travel, can you sign off? And then they would sign off, and then we would go to the next thing. Okay, now we've decided this system, it's going to cost this much. We need this support for it. And I would deliver it, and then they'd sign off again. So I was just like every day going with, and I think they were just like, who is this crazy lady? Like every day, papers to sign. But that's how we got things done. So yeah, so the press is being built. People are in the theater. They're working. We're trying to get them computers. We're working with a design consultant in Montreal to design the newspaper. So I have a team working there. That's like the people under me. Keep in mind, at this moment, I'm still just the art director, but I'm doing like
Right.
buying systems and buying computers, and there's just so much going on. Everybody's pitching in wherever they can. Like it's just we were all doing everything, and we're building the newsroom. So I'm in an office, and outside this office is the construction going on of the newsroom. So every 30 minutes, some guy comes in to ask me a question about, oh, what paint do you want here? And what should we do with this pillar? And where do you want this wall to be? And like, so
Yeah.
I'm designing, ordering, printing press, figuring out the
Design of the workspace.
colors and ordering
Yeah.
furniture. And yeah, it was pretty wild.
But obviously that like, where do you think that trust came from for you to be the person that was like, you just took the reins, and or was it the art director is the most logical person to be kind of making all of
It
the
was,
decisions? Yeah.
I think lots of people could have done what I was doing. I'm not in any way purporting that I'm so special. It was a sequence of events. I was the
Yeah.
first one there. And
Yeah.
so that legacy
Yeah.
knowledge of what had happened before
Yeah.
served me
Right.
very well. I
Yeah.
made I am a fairly affable person. So I had made a lot of connections very quickly. I knew all the guys from Mubadala. I knew all the guys working on the construction crew. I knew, the people in the cafeteria. I knew the guy in finance who was helping us do the HR contracts, because at that time there wasn't really an HR department that was functioning. So the CFO's assistant was creating the
I love it.
contracts for us to send to new hires. So basically, yeah,
Tell me
I,
you're part of a startup without telling me you're part of a startup.
exactly.
CFO's assist.
It was crazy. And things moved very quickly then. Like it was very funny. We always looked back and realized like we could get a contract out and get that person within a couple of weeks. And then, 10 years later, it was taking like 6 months to hire somebody
Right.
because it was all
Right.
this. It was a proper company now. And it's like, oh, so slow.
And that's what happens though, right?
Yeah.
Is all of a sudden, you establish policy, you establish process, you mitigate risk rather than exposing yourself to your risk appetite as an organization gets diminished a lot because you're established. Now you've got a legacy, you got a name, you got a brand. Awesome. So let's wind up the launch. Tell me about kind of the last days before the first paper goes out. Was that experience similar to the National Post in Canada, where you were doing dry runs and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff?
we were doing
And
dry
then,
runs. We moved into the new newsroom, and I have photos of that day and the smiles on people's
yeah,
faces when they moved into the real newsroom. Amazing, like contagious smiles.
it's
So
awesome.
we got settled. We were doing the dry runs. Everybody was really comfortable. There was one day when there was a horrific, like I can't remember, it was like a 40-car pileup on Sheikh Zayed Road because it was a foggy day and there was this
Jeez.
horrible accident. And we covered the heck out of that story. And if we had been live at that time, we would have been so proud of what we were publishing.
Oh yeah.
But it was like basically, sometimes you just have that moment where you're like, yes, we're ready. And we
Right.
were ready. It was
That
like
was that moment.
we knew because we did such a good job covering this breaking news event that we had
Right.
created that well-oiled machine. Everybody knew their role. We were able to just work perfectly in harmony and produce what we needed to produce quickly, accurately, smartly. And it was just basically, that was sort of a turning point where we're like, okay, the training wheels can come off. We're ready.
Yeah. That's amazing. And what a feeling. Like I think there's a lot of startups that would be able to relate to that, and others that wouldn't, right? Others that it was a slog from day one and they never found that rhythm.
Sure. No, I mean,
And
we worked
that's how it
hard. I'm not
goes.
going to
Yeah,
pretend
yeah,
like
sure.
it was a walk in the
Sure.
park. It was,
No, of course.
we didn't sleep very much and we drank too much. And it was, in some ways, a very cliched journalism,
Right. Sure.
newsroom kind of
Yeah. I love
experience.
it. Yeah.
But we held each other up. We really, really did.
Yeah.
So
That's
in the
amazing.
days leading up to the actual launch, like we built this thing and we had a prototype that we were very proud of, but we couldn't go. That this whole thing was a project from the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, and so it basically needed his blessing before we could move forward and launch the paper. So Martin Newland, Sheikh Mohammed's a busy dude, like he's
a sheikh.
the biggest guy in the country, and you go when he calls. So it's not like, oh, we'll put this appointment in the book for 2 weeks from now. No, it's like basically you'll hear, don't call us, we'll call you. So Martin, he knew that this was going to happen within like a few days. And so he walked around for 3 days in his best suit and his polished shoes.
Just in case, now's the time.
Ready to go at a moment's notice.
That's amazing.
We did tease him mercilessly, sorry. And so finally he gets the call and you're thinking like, oh, this is it. Okay, let's hope that he likes it because...
Of course.
Yikes.
All the work. Yeah.
And it turns out that this meeting that was basically determining all of our futures happened in the mall in a coffee shop. You would think that he's going to like some palace or a majlis or an office or no, it happened in the coffee shop at the mall. So the good news is that it was like totally approved. Everything was set. He was happy. I think this is probably when they agreed that the go live date, actually, April 17th,
was X date.
And we had the green light and we could go ahead. And we did. So on the day that was finally the go live, the way that the paper was printed, the arts and life section goes earlier because it's staggered. So that one would be printed first, late in the afternoon, and then it would be the other sections would follow. And for my efforts, the guys in the press, who by this time were very tired of me, gave me the privilege and the honor of being able to start the press on the very first run of the National. So I have a picture that I hold dear of my finger on that button starting the press. And thank goodness, or as they say here, alhamdulillah, the press started and it ran. The evening run was a little trickier. It had quite a few hiccups, and we were there till the wee hours watching the press run and waiting for it to be finished. But it came off, and that was the day that we went live was the first time the press had run in full the entire paper. So it was really cutting it close.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. It was good.
So that the kind of question I have that probably is a silly question. Is it still the same printing press?
Oh, so
that you're using today?
Is I did tell you he's a smart man, and I wasn't lying. So there was always a plan, like a long-term plan in Abu Dhabi Media, to build a big printing press that consolidated these two presses and more presses for other purposes in a small place called Shahama. Shahama is halfway between Abu Dhabi and Dubai or thereabouts. So it's a good place to put something that needs to be
For
distributed
distribution.
around
Yeah.
the country. And when Ali did the contract for our press, he built into the
Oh,
agreement, that the entire press would be dismantled, moved to Shahama, and rebuilt a second time. That's what happened.
wow. Wow.
So in the meantime, they built another press that we could be running on, and then they moved
Yeah.
that press, and the press that the Arabic paper printed on, which was in the the ground floor of our building, that one just it died
A
noble
graceful,
death, a noble,
noble death.
greasy death. It was just like there. I think it
Yeah.
was sold off eventually for parts, but it was
Yeah.
very old. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. So, if you can believe it, we're an hour into this conversation, but I do want to talk a little bit. Like you've alluded to it a couple of times. We were talking about it before I pressed record. Just the disruption that's happened in the media industry in general. But talk about that a little bit. Like we've got the startup story now, which is incredible. I like there's been another 18 years, as you pointed out, since kind of that launch, or close to 18 years, 17 years. What does that evolution look like? Your transition, again, that entrepreneurial. I know you've ventured off focusing on kind of the technology, the disruption from that perspective. Tell me some of the milestones where you could see the writing was on the wall that things were really changing.
Yeah, I mean, people who worked here years ago, when I talk to them and tell them that I'm still here doing the same job, they kind of roll their eyes, but it's not
Right.
the same job.
It's not.
There's
Yeah.
nothing, it's not even remotely the same job.
Yeah.
I must mention that in the middle of it, 8 years ago, uh, we just celebrated our anniversary. Um, the National was moved out of Abu Dhabi Media by decree. So we were moved to a private company. So we went from being a government owned newspaper to a private newspaper. And that whole process was extremely disruptive, obviously. Like we basically all got paid out from our current employer. We were terminated. We reapplied for jobs. Some of us were lucky to get taken on by the new entity. Some had to find new work. And we basically, I would say it's kind of like the third startup that I've worked on, because everything had to start from scratch. We needed all new wire agency contracts. We needed all new computers, a new content management system, all those things that I talked about, a new newsroom, new furniture, everything had to be done again. And during that transition, there was a big emphasis on upskilling. So even though I might sound like I was super pretentious coming here and knowing how to do journalism in a more modern way, we were just as guilty of losing
Right.
that
Right.
sort of
Oh,
edge,
interesting.
which
Yeah.
everybody is if you don't stay on top of it. Probably
Sure.
every business is like this now. But for us, like we nobody reads print anymore. We have print. We're proud of our print. It's it's used more as a marketing vehicle to make sure our brand is seen, but it's mostly subscriptions now. So people who want it to their door, we're not so focused on putting it in other places.
Distribution. Yeah.
Our entire concern is digital. And it's not just digital, it's social media and video. And if you had told me that when I was doing copy editing at the National Post, I would have just looked at you like you had three heads. Like, it makes no sense
Sure,
at
of
all.
course. Yeah.
But now, even everything changes. We are watching live analytics of who's reading us, where they're coming from, how they got to us. These, analytics inform the decisions we're making of what we're putting in different places on the website, what we're promoting, how we're promoting it, the voice that we're using, the platform that we're using for different things. Lengths of videos, like everything is being informed by data. And Laura is no longer the algorithm. The algorithm is
Yes.
and
We're
it's
gonna
something we used to take great pride in it, and like knowing what people should read over their Cheerios in the morning. Like, oh no, this is the best mix for the morning. Now it's just like, okay, well, people seem to be interested in this today. Let's give them more of that. Um, and of course, that's not entirely how we decide things. There's things that are worthy and need to be reported and are important, but there's also things that, there's an appetite for certain kinds of stories or certain, ways of telling stories. So we want to be able to engage the audience. And even the way that we measure success has changed so much. Like, even this year, we used to care about how many page views we got. We don't care about page views anymore. Now we care about how long people are engaged with our content. So these metrics are always changing. The way that we measure ourselves is always changing. And the skills that we're looking for when people are coming in and being hired are different as well. They need to be far more wide ranging than they used to be. It helps to come into a journalism job and have a following already, because you're going to be promoting the stories that you're telling on social media. That's how most people find us. So these things are really important. And now, obviously, AI is the biggest sort of consideration for us right now. Every journalism conference in the last 2 years has,
of course.
every single session has some AI conversation built into it. And, different papers have a different sort of tolerance for having AI, how they're using AI. And for us, because I may as well answer this question, because if I were listening to me, I'd be like, well, what do you think?
What is it?
So for us,
Look, Lord knows the host isn't going to ask. He's terrible at this job. You gotta give him layups.
No, I would just say, for us now, with an understanding that this is changing every day and always and forever. But right now, our red line is creating content. So our journalists are responsible for creating all content. Whatever AI tools they want to use to assist them in doing that, we can have that discussion and we will approve certain tools. So, for example, if somebody, poor soul, if they actually had to, write a story off this podcast, they could use a transcription tool, and that would be okay. Well, that's AI, but they could use that.
Of course.
But then they would have to write the piece themselves. So that's the red line that we have right now. And until AI is a lot more reliable and can source properly and not hallucinate, I think that will be our position. But different papers are taking different positions and finding different ways to use AI. And I know that. And I think any responsible person in the working world now needs to figure out, like, if there is a way that they can incorporate AI. And I am very pleased to say that I built my first AI agent last week, and I've been showing it off like a shiny new car because it works, and it's yeah. I think I'm going to have to share it soon, but yeah, I'm quite pleased that I figured out. Uh, staying. I wouldn't say I'm ahead of the curve, but I'm like
Yeah.
at least not at the very back of the curve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of, I have this conversation so often in my role too. Like, the real estate sector that I'm involved with, of course, there's always disruption, and AI is the next, what everybody sees as being the next big disruptor. I really appreciated the context that you gave to the amount of data, because that, like, so many industries hinge their decision making and where they're going, and how, what decisions they need to make in order to know where they're going, on the data that's informing those decisions. I think that's the whole aspect of AI and any type of, models, learning models, whatever they are. They're useless if there isn't data, or if there isn't quality data, and that's where you get the hallucinations and all those types of things. So I think there's this, like, certainly I'm feeling this pressure to move as fast as the AI is evolving. But the reality is, the integration of technology will never move as fast as technology allows it, because there's always the human element. Humans always pull back or prevent us from keeping up with technology. And so I'm doing the same thing you are. We're kind of integrating where we can, where we're comfortable, but it's not every time there's a new iteration or something, another shiny thing, that there's an expectation that we need to disrupt everything we're doing. It's how do we move at our pace to figure out how to adopt.
I'm actually fascinated by uh, we have spent a good 5 months looking at like doing just gap analysis, trying to figure out
Right.
everywhere where
Where
AI could offer us
Yep.
some
Yep.
support. And so now we're firmly in the experimentation phase. And what we're finding is so often we're dropping the idea of like how
Right.
AI can help because it's not actually meeting
Filling
any
a gap.
outcomes that we wanted. It's taking longer, or it's less
Yeah. Yeah.
reliable, or
Yeah.
it, it's
Yeah.
it still needs a human element, or it's moving the bulk of the effort to a different group of people.
Right.
One
Yeah.
group's really
Sure.
happy, but the other group then has to do more. So we're not finding. I kind of thought when we kind of entered this um, sort of AI. I'm calling it the year of AI for our paper because it was like, you know, all the things that we should try this year, and just it's not working out like I thought. I thought we would come out of the year with like 4 or 5 great solutions, and every experiment's just not coming up roses. So, but that's okay. I mean, that's why you
Absolutely.
just introduce it and hope for the best. We're really, finding granular experiments. If it works, and we roll it out to something bigger. And we have one starting in a couple of weeks that we're all more hopeful for because it will really, if it works, it'll be great. But so far, it's just not kind of eh, fitting fitting AI into the puzzle of your business is not as easy as it sounds in all the conferences and workshops and everything. It's
Yeah.
hard.
Well, and even like fitting it in, but like you're saying, for a purpose, right?
Right.
For an outcome.
Oh
Like, you
yeah,
might
you
be able
can
to
you
fit it
can
in,
plug
but
in all these AI
yeah,
tools, but
exactly.
to what end?
Yeah.
We need them to
Yeah.
actually benefit us. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine that everybody is seeing benefits out of all these things that they're implementing. I think they're doing it for the bells and whistles to make everything look shinier, but I don't think it's. I'm curious. I mean, I'm still investigating and learning.
Everybody is. Everybody is. Yeah. I
See.
the conversations I'm having is, there's a difference between leveraging any type of technology or tool to become more efficient versus more productive. And if we're leveraging AI and it just means that we can send and receive more emails, that's not a benefit. Like, sure, we're more efficient at sending emails, but what's the productivity? What's the outcome of doing that? And so I'm much more interested in what is our output as a result of the plug-in, like you said, versus just plugging in and doing more stuff more quickly. That doesn't inspire me at all. So those are, but everybody's, it's a journey. You love that word.
What's that? Did you say journey?
I said it's a journey. Yeah, it's a journey.
No, my latest AI pet peeve is we have Microsoft Copilot, and it will allow you to respond to an email, but the response says nothing.
Yeah.
It's like it's just eating my time reading words that say nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, just say just say okay. I just need 2 letters. Okay, you read my email. Great. Okay, done.
Well, if it's an internal email, just do the little emoji thing.
Like
thumbs
5
up.
paragraphs repeating back to me what I've already said to that end. Like, it's just AI is causing me more grief.
Yeah. But I mean, that's like everybody has had that argument with every single piece of technology that's come along. So, yeah. Okay. That was amazing. And, I am so glad we did this. I think but just to give her a shout out on the podcast, I mentioned my daughter Abby, your niece, before. But in this context, you've been a huge inspiration for her. She's in journalism now, and kind of, I think all of her cohort and anybody that's looking at this career direction of telling stories, of being out there and sharing news, and doing it in a framework, in an environment of all of the garbage that we see, and the myriad of the amount of information that gets shared and content that gets created. Finding your voice, being able to have an impact, being able to tell the story, understanding what bias is, all of those things. And you are an amazing role model for her, and for, I think, a lot of other people, not just in your industry but beyond. And I'm profoundly proud of you and the journey that you've been on. So
ditto, baby.
Thank you for doing this. What's that?
I said ditto, baby.
Yeah. Siblings. Thank you for doing this, Laura. Really, really awesome.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry I'm not an entrepreneur.
But you are. We'll let the people listening decide. What is this an entrepreneurial story?
That's it. Run for a poll.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Love you.
Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Business is Fucking Hard. Please remember that this show is meant to create community and share ideas in the business world. For advice specific to your business, talk to an expert in your industry. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on Instagram and LinkedIn, and invite others to do the same. This episode was hosted by me, Trevor Koot, and produced and edited by Alex Harris. Thanks for tuning in, and talk to you next time.